Good afternoon and welcome. I'm James Stewart and I'm director of the Princeton University Art Museum, and I'm very pleased to welcome you today to what is certain to be a fascinating conversation on the occasion of the 2015 International Artist in Residence program at the Art Museum, made possible by the generosity of our alumna Sarah Elson of the class of 1984. Though only a few years old, this program has already brought to Princeton a series of remarkable artists who have interacted with our students and brought fresh perspectives. Is the mic not on? Okay. Fresh perspectives to our considerations of contemporary artistic practice. This year's Elson International Artist in Residence sets the bar almost impossibly high, and he is Anatsui. Born in 1944 in Kumasi, Ghana, Anatsui is one of the most exciting international contemporary artists of our time, and perhaps the most significant living African artist. He is renowned not only for his unique artistic vision and his long-term commitment to formal innovation, but also for the role he has played in advancing Africa's artistic and cultural traditions on an international stage. Throughout a distinguished 40-year career as both sculptor and teacher, Anatsui has addressed a vast range of social, political, and historical concerns and embraced an equally diverse range of media and processes. His artistic development was shaped early on by the progressive cultural politics championed by Ghanaian and African cultural nationalists of the independence era. His installations and other works have garnered wide international attention, with audiences fascinated by his sumptuous works made from thousands of aluminum bottle tops. His sculptures have been collected by major museums around the world, from the British Museum to the Centre Pompidou, to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, to perhaps most recently our own museum, where El's work entitled Another Place from last year went on view a few days ago. El's pace in recent years has been blistering. During the Venice Biennale in 2007, he transformed the facade of the Palazzo Fortuny by draping it in a shimmering wall sculpture. In 2010, two major touring exhibitions of his work opened on opposite sides of the globe. Anatsui, When I Last Wrote to You About Africa at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, and A Fateful Journey, Africa in the Works of Anatsui at the National Museum of Ethnology in Osaka, Japan. In 2013, the Brooklyn Museum exhibited the touring solo exhibition, Gravity and Grace, Monumental Works by Anatsui, which garnered extraordinary critical acclaim and an equivalent outpouring of popular enthusiasm. The Royal Academy in London presented El with the prestigious Charles Wollaston Award in 2013, while the following year he was made an honorary Royal Academician and was also elected into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. El's visit with us today is a special honor because this very day he was awarded the Golden Lion for Lifetime Achievement of the 56th International Art Exhibition at the Venice Biennale. Well-deserved recognition for a lifetime's achievement as an artist and as an irreplaceable influence on two generations of artists working in West Africa. El will be in conversation this afternoon with the person most responsible for encouraging him to visit us in Princeton, and that is our good friend Chika Okeke Agulu. Chika is Associate Professor of Art and Archaeology here at Princeton, where he specializes in the art and visual cultures of Africa and African diaspora areas. He is particularly interested in the history of modernism in Africa and the intersection of art and politics in modern and contemporary art. He's the author with Okwe and Wezor of Contemporary African Art Since 1980, published in 2009, and was the editor of the first ever issue of the journal African Arts in 2006. From my point of view, blessedly among academic art historians, Chika is committed to the art exhibition. He has written numerous catalogs for and organized or co-organized several canonical exhibitions, including 7 stories about modern art in Africa, The Short Century, Independence and Liberation Movements in Africa, 1945 to 1994. But fundamentally, I think, Chika refuses to fit tidily into a single creative box. His academic training speaks to this, for he holds both an MFA in painting from the University of Nigeria and a PhD in the history of art from Emory University. As an art critic, his writings have appeared in outlets as wide-ranging as The Guardian in Lagos, Art Forum in New York, and Art South Africa in Johannesburg. A published poet, Chika is also an artist with more than 35 one-person and group exhibitions from Africa to Europe to Asia and the United States. He's a core faculty member in Princeton's Center for African American Studies and a member of the executive board of our program in African Studies. He serves on the board of directors of Princeton in Africa, is a columnist for the Huffington Post, and maintains a lively and much discussed personal blog. He's working on a book-length study of art during the late 19th century military dictatorships in Nigeria. I hope all of you will join us at the museum after this conversation, both to discover the work of Anatsui in person and to enjoy a reception with our special guests. For now, please join me in welcoming Anatsui and Chika Okeke Agulu.
It's with great pleasure an honor to do this with Anatsui, who is a teacher, a former colleague, and a friend. I still remain and probably will always be a student of his work. So the opportunity to have conversations like this, I cherish, and I hope that we will make this worthwhile. What we'll do is we'll have the images screening behind as we engage in a number of topics about his work. At some point, we may come back to a particular image if we need to talk about that. What I want for us to do this afternoon is to go back in time. And I do this particularly because there's a sense in which Anatsui's work since 2007 seems to have come out of nowhere. There was the rather infamous New York Times article that wondered, what happens when the newness of Anatsui wears off. And for some of us, we're wondering which newness, right? 45 years of practice. So what we'll do mostly in this conversation is to look at the trajectory of his practice from the very beginning. Along the way, we will come to the more familiar metal sculptures, which have captured the global art world imagination and fascination. So with that, Elle, I want to start with your first years as an artist. You trained in Ghana in the art school in Kumasi. And at the time, the art school was affiliated to a British, academic program. And that meant that you worked, you often reminded us in art school with plaster of Paris, right? Even though you were working in Ghana. And soon after art school, you moved on rather very quickly to the kind of work that early scholars of your work were familiar, which were these trays. Excuse me, let me get this. So you were working with these circular trays that you encountered post-college. Could you tell us just a little bit about this transformation, this moment when after school with the academic program in sculpture, you began to make these circular wooden trays, and this was in the late 1960s Ghana, 10 years after independence. You often talk about what you call the sankofa period. What is sankofa in terms of how you understood it and your engagement with what you've called the ideology of sankofa?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Maybe I start from school, and then I'll, after that, address the sankofa issue. Yeah, I went to school, which was tailored around, a British art school curriculum, and therefore it happened to have very little content of my own cultural content. And towards the end of the course, you know, some of us felt that there was something missing, that we should have something. Imagine that we went to school and learned mostly about European art history. You know, in art history, we are doing mostly European art history and maybe occasionally Asian, or, you know, but nothing about Africa, you know, or not talked about Ghana, you know. And some of us felt that there was this missing thing and we have to look for. And in the course of search for that kind of patrimony, you know, the cultural patrimony that we felt was missing, you know, because it was as if my part of the world didn't have an art culture, you know, and incidentally, the university happened to be in a city which had a National Cultural Center. And, well, the National Cultural Center was there, but it wasn't part of the teaching resource that was used. It wasn't used at all. And some of us went there and discovered that there was this huge body of heritage that we could have benefited from. And one of them that I particularly took a liking to was this body of ideograms or signs or, you know, graphic marks that were used in printing on cloths which are worn at funerals. At funerals, because we believe that that's a time for reflection. You know, at funeral time is time for reflection. So most of these would be based on sayings or aphorisms, or, you know, and in most cases, all of them were dealing with very abstract concepts, you know, concepts like versatility, like the omnipotence of God, and so on and so forth, you know, which was what actually got me very interested in them, because at the time that I came across them, we had just finished learning about the European Renaissance, you know, learning about Paulo Uccello and mathematical perspective and all those things, which I thought was rather physical, you know. And here were artists who are doing something which got them grappling with you know, very abstract and concept, intangible things. And that discovery was very crucial to me because it has become the way I've gone throughout. Although in art school, our training was strictly along lines of verisimilitude, like doing life studies, portraiture, and all those things, which I did very well. But I thought that there was something missing. There was something lacking in them, you know. And with this, I saw that there was a lot of scope for one to grow. At the time I left art school, my country was just about 10 years independent, and the euphoria of independence was there, and there was a lot of things happening. One of them was that there was a feeling that we should go back to pick, you know, from our cultural heritage. And the idea of going back is what was called sankofa, go back and pick it, you know. And it is one of the ideograms that were very common in the Adinkra repertoire.
I think if I may, you know, nudge that a little bit. I think one of the things that happened at this point with the sankofa movement was years before you had that generation of artists, the earlier generation of artists at Independence who were wondering and debating the question of language, artistic language. In literature, writers were debating these questions, you know, in what language shall we write, you know, as writers in newly independent countries? Do we write in the colonial language or in the supposedly indigenous languages? And so I think that the sankofa movement was part of that context.
Yeah, it was part of that, and I think I didn't have problems with it because when I finished art school, I knew that I had to work not with the media that I was taught in school, but that I have to search for my own media or my own medium. And the media that I would normally come to hand would be the media that are in the environment, the media that everybody understood, everybody knew, everybody could react to. And so the selection of the traits, you know, that I used as support for the ideograms that I had studied, I've been studying. I spent about 5 years working with these ideograms, you know, and on these traits. And I found that I didn't have the problem of that the literature, people in literature had, because they had to think about accessibility to the audience. And I didn't have it because the traits are common traits that everybody sees in the market, and so they knew them very well, they understood them, and here they are being used in a different way. And so they reacted to it very positively.
One of the things that then happened after this moment in the late 60s and early 70s was your relocation from Ghana to Nigeria, to the University of Nigeria in Nsukka in 1975. Your work with the trays continued, the circular trays, continued through this period. But it was also that you encountered a different intellectual context of artists who were exploring similar questions. But you made a tactical move, if I could use that term, which is to, in 1977, you began to explore clay as a medium. So you stepped off from wood, though you returned to it later on, but you began to work with clay and the idea of pots, which led to the Broken Pot series that you produced in, from 77 through 79, 80. And I'm wondering what was the significance of this, given that you were just previously speaking about how working with these circular trays, these wooden trays, were common, you were interested in common materials. And now you moved to clay. What was the point?
And I think clay is one of the commonest. It's everywhere. That's the ground on which we walk. And so it also was a good move, to a medium which is not strange to people. And I didn't only select a medium which is not strange to people, but I selected an object made with that medium. The commonest object that we make it with clay is the pot. And I went into my culture in order to search for ideas, and it wasn't very difficult to find the idea, because in my culture, and I think in most cultures in Africa, when pots break, when a pot is whole, it's used for only one function. It's either a water pot, or a soup pot, or a wine pot, or just one function. But the moment it breaks, the shards come into so many other uses. And so the idea of, breaking, as not being an end of life, but rather a multiplication of life, came in very handy over there. And these are some of the ideas that I explored with the Broken Pots series, in which one of the ideas was this one that, when pots break, eventually they can grind them into grog that is used in mixing with fresh clay in order to make new pots. And in the process, the new pot acquires the strength of the old pot. It's like the memory of the old pot. And so before that can happen, it means that there has to be the breakage. And so the idea of life, and regeneration. The idea of regeneration was one of the ones that I explored, and the fact that as a prerequisite for it, there has to be break up or decay, or without decay or breakdown, you can't regenerate. So I explored this series of ideas in the body of work that I did called the Broken Pot series.
Now, you worked with wood, you went to clay. In 1980, something else happened in your work. Again, really radical shift that happened in your work, and this was as a result of your
my
residency in Massachusetts, in Cummington, Massachusetts. What was the significance of that residency?
Well, the significance, the episode was like this, that I was given the residency, and I was told that they have lots of wood, and I should just come and make use of wood, And I did order wood carving tools, the traditional wood carving tools, from one company in New York or thereabouts, to be shipped to the place for me. They shipped them there, and I went there, saw them, and actually started working with those chisels and mallets and, which are the traditional things you use in working with wood. But I'm an artist who is given to really exploring not only medium but process as well. And I want to stretch process as much as possible. I want to even try new processes on, regular media, to see what happens in order to, So during the course of my using a chainsaw to log wood, for me to carry to the studio in order to use the regular this thing to work on, I discovered that the chainsaw as a tool had a very, very peculiar language. It had a peculiar language which was worth learning, and so I proceeded. Not over there, but when I went back, I got determined to explore the language of the chainsaw. And it's a language of very high speed and and slashing and all kinds of things, which could be really interesting and dangerous at the same time. I saw that there were, meanings and other things that one could attach to, the language of the chainsaw. Although I started with the chainsaw, I did add some other power tools in course of time. The chainsaw being very rough and uncouth, and other tools which were more controllable and therefore would yield finer lines and such things, And I did a series of work. I did explore these tools, the chainsaw being the main one, and these ones for over 14, 15, 16. I still explore them anyway, on occasion, and
yeah,
well,
so the chainsaw, this is from 1992 at the Arte Amazonas, where you worked with the chainsaw to create this piece that you called Erosion.
Yep.
You've also spoken about the symbolism of the chainsaw, the rapacious, almost vicious language, you describe as peculiar. It's a violent language of the chainsaw that you try to tame. Right. And in 1992 at the Arte Amazonas, when you created this piece, Erosion, could you describe the process of making this piece, which will just come up on the screen shortly?
Yeah, before the Earth Summit in 1992, a group of artists were invited to, react artistically to the subject of the summit, that's the environment, and I was one of them. Was taken to a place where they do research into wood, the wood of the Amazon. And, being a research place for wood, there was a lot of logs and other things there. And what I did was to get a log, a huge one, and then we were there for about a month. I spent about 26, 27 days slowly engraving signs and symbols and all kinds of graphic marks, which I had researched from, not only from my own part of the world, but from all parts of the world. It's a way of talking about cultures of the world. Cultures do take a long time to develop, I spent the 26 days doing this slow, manicuring the wood and putting all these. And then on the 27th day, I got a chainsaw, and within 1 hour, I had slashed most of these. In fact, literally eroded these sculptures. Culture that has taken so many days for me to build, it's like one man can't hide down, after discovering industrialization and mechanization, then pace of things got out of hand and we couldn't control them, and therefore the erosion, that was my statement about the erosion, the fact that we tended not to understand the implications of things that we invented ostensibly to make life easier, but has resulted in global warming and all these things, and deforestation, etc. Yeah.
So the language of the chainsaw allowed you to comment on cultural erosion, right? The Earth Summit was ostensibly about the environment, which was why they cited it at the Amazon. But you are also invested in questions of cultural erosion. Mm-hmm. But you've also talked about the chainsaw in the context of colonization and the impact that process had on the colonized cultures as well.
Yeah, I think that was the first one that I engaged in with the chainsaw. The speed and the manner of the chainsaw's lines, just reminded me of the Berlin Conference in 1884, thereabouts, where the map of Africa was put down on the table, and then ruler and all these things were used to divide it into countries. The chainsaw is very good at making straight lines. Very straight lines. If you try making anything, you might be in trouble. So, so that was the first thing it reminded me of, because you look at a map of some African countries, you have a straight line on one side and, such things. The fact that the chainsaw could do this made it a very strong symbol for me of colonization. And the fact that it can be done so fast,
One of the things that come out of this process of working wood, I think, is the very specific way that you're thinking about sculpture as a genre. If one went back to the trays, they were wall-bound objects to be hung on the wall. When you return to wood after the Cummington experience, your sculpture went on the wall. But also, yes, there's relief sculpture that we have over time. But in the particular way that you're working wood, if one thought about woodworking, wood sculptures that are associated with African cultures and societies, they were three-dimensional, freestanding masks or ritual forms. But you are thinking about sculpture as a provision of data, whereby the reliefs are constituted by single, multiple panels, right, that can be interchanged. I think, this is something that seems to run through the work from then on, this idea that sculpture is not a fixed object. But at the same time, you're not dealing with mobile sculpture. This is something I want us to return to slightly later on.
Actually, this started with the Broken Pot series, not with the wood, and has gone on through the wood to the metals, and it's going on. The idea of working in multiples of components, I think, probably was engendered by the thought of the broken pot. When it breaks, then it acquires more uses and therefore more meaning, you know, and probably it has something to do with when I did a little bit of art education, and I did a little bit of statistics in art education, and saw that when you are dealing with populations, you have more scope to play with things, you know, rather than if you have just one individual, you know, and so then also the fact that things are always in a state of constant flux, and therefore you want to think of sculpture as something that has that property, you know, the property of being able to change, being able to be reconfigured, you know. And I'm sure that these are some of the reasons that led me to work with what I call the non-fixed form, the form which is capable of being redone over and over.
That same quality, this very idea that the composition of the reliefs are never fixed, that you could reconfigure them if you have custody of the work, you know, as a curator, as a collector, it places a lot of burden on the, on the viewer or the collector or the curator. But just to step back a little bit, that at the moment when you were working in wood and you had come to this point where you imagined the sculptural form as constituted by multiple elements, the wood slats that are then, composed into these abstract compositions. This was when you began to experiment with metal, with the bottle tops that towards the end of the 90s. Before then, you had worked on the signature series, the logs of wood, and this was again at the moment when you went on a residency in England this time. I see a connection between, I see the signature series as a transitional moment from the wood sculpture to the metal pieces, in the sense that you are working with the end of the logs that you marked, with colors that seem to echo the kind of very tiny little details of the metal works. There's a slide that will come up that shows the different patterns of weaving. Among those is a section of the signature series. And if you didn't look closely, you wouldn't realize that one is from the signature series, which was wood, and the others are from the metal works. So I tend to see that as the transitional moment when it became possible for you to imagine, the metal sculptures. And I have to bracket that with the fact that you had been collecting these things, these bottle tops, for quite a while. And they were in the studio for a bit of time before you figured out what to do with them. Do you see that connection between the signature
it's a revelation you are giving me. I never thought about the ends of the wood representing the bottle tops. Yeah, yeah, maybe, well, when things happen, they are unconscious, at the beginning. And when you become conscious, then you can now begin to categorically say that, yeah, say this is what is happening, And probably that was a transition. It could be a transition. And this morning when I saw the slide which showed the color scheme,
Yes.
the color scheme I selected for this thing,
for the signatures,
it gave a lie to a claim I've been making. Well, it didn't give a lie to it, but it kind of made me aware that maybe something was happening unconsciously, but I didn't know, you know. And that was that, you know, the kente cloth idea was kind of embedded in my this thing, but I wasn't quite aware of it.
Yeah, you're talking about the connection that has been made, perhaps ad nauseum, about the relationship between your metalwork and kente cloth.
Kente cloth, yeah. And I always say that, well, I didn't put I didn't give the colors to the bottle caps myself. They were given by the makers, you know, and so it wasn't my idea that the color scheme of the bottle caps was like the color scheme of the kente. You know, it didn't come from me. but when I saw the slide this morning, I saw that, well, there were reminiscences of the kente in there. You know, but then the question again is, what was I making with the bottle caps? I was making sculptures, not textiles. And the sculptures happen to have the color scheme of the kente. And most people writing about the bottle caps in the beginning would write something and end up with kente, and that was all. And I thought that was a disservice to the works.
I think part of
the first one I did was called man's cloth and woman's cloth. And I think the idea, the word cloth in there must have, stuck with people. And then they easily went to kente, and that was the end of it, you know. Whereas when you look at that work, you might be led to ask yourself, why is this one called man's cloth and this one called woman's cloth? There were big size differences between them. The dimensions were very different, you know, because the man's cloth in my culture is actually very big, and the woman's cloth, well, they normally would wear two of them, but even if you put the two together, they're not up to the size of a man's cloth, you know. So nobody ever thought about gender issues or, you know, in respect of the work, but everybody here veers to kente and then stops there, you know. Those are some of the reasons why I've wanted to tell people that they are sculptures and they should be looked at as sculptures and not just kente.
I think part of the problem with that particular issue is it came out of how to display and where to display the work in museum collections. If I recall, some of the earliest collections were by museums that were invested in African art, or sections of the museums, curators of African art in museums. And typically they would have, you know, African objects and kente cloth. You know, Princeton has one, you know, the kente cloth in the African collection. And the question has always been, where do you display the work of contemporary African artists? It's still a problem that curators grapple with. And so with your work, well, it's on the wall. The kente cloth is on the wall. You're from Ghana. Kente is from Ghana. It's, and you've spoken about the connection between the Adinkra signs and the, you know, the mourning cloth, right? Mm-hmm. So it became an easy way of
linking.
Yeah, inscribing the work into the African collection. And of course, you know, we saw that at the Met, right? There's the kente cloth on one side and then one of your early metal works. So I think that was part of the solution, right? An easy solution to placing the work in what was already very hard boundaries within the museums and the way that they, decide where to put which works. Now, what this would lead me to is what I have been quite in recent, actually in the past 2 years, this question of the flexibility that you give to curators in terms of installing your work. Many a curator I know have been so terrified by this idea that you could install the work however you wish. So that is something that I want for us to explore. And part of the reason I'm interested in this is that when you look at particular works, they have a kind of lifetime, by which I mean that they are what I've called metamorphic objects. They are shape-shifting. The work at the Met, right, which was acquired in 2007 after the Venice Biennial, when it was installed the first time, it looked quite, it looked a particular way. Then it was deinstalled and installed again, and it looked different. Compositionally, so you are dealing with, sculpture, so there's composition, there's texture, all of those things, colors, the relationships that the particular installation mobilized were different at these two different times. And given your expectation that the work should be installed however the curator wishes, that means that if they deinstall it again in another 10, maybe 50 years, it would look different. And the question for me is, what kind of objects are these? What kind of sculptural objects are these? Because you can, calling them conceptual art or calling them mobile doesn't quite get at the materiality of the works. But then the fact that at particular moments that you encounter them, perhaps in another venue, they look different, right?
Yeah, I don't know whether I'm interested in how they are called.
Me neither.
The most important thing for me is that it should give opportunity each time it's brought out, to be given a new shape. Given a new shape, and well, I think that's even what the work itself asks for, because you can't replicate, what shape it was given in its former installation, again, you can't. You can't, and so it lends itself to. And therefore, if it's understood well by the curator or whoever is hanging, then it should take advantage of that freedom and, the leeway provided, to play around. And I've always mentioned this in several places, that one of the very interesting installations of my pieces, it was in the most unlikely of places, in the Vatican. The church is supposed to be very conservative, and so when they asked for the work, me to contribute the work, and I contributed it to the exhibition, I was curious, and wanted to know how they were going to install. So for that reason, I traveled to the opening. And to my very pleasant surprise, they did one of the most interesting installations of the pieces that I've ever seen by even a museum or a gallery, you know. Yeah, they told me that they spent quite a number of days. The rest of the works that they had were easy to hang. They can hang about maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 in a day, but with mine, they took many, many days to arrive at what they did, you know. And I saw that they used a lot of freedom, the freedom that I always want people to exercise when they mount this. They really made use of it and came with something that I wish I had gotten the picture of it. Maybe next time I speak about it, I'll take the picture along and show, you know, that it wasn't, you know, the format was the regular, this thing, but what they got eventually out wasn't in any way related to that format. You know, they went completely out of it and even threw a bit of it over the board on which it was, you know. So I think that's the kind of freedom that I had to learn something from it, you know, from a church, you know. And
So does that mean that there are installations that you don't like?
Yeah, certainly there have been installations of it that I felt that people didn't quite get at one with, or didn't quite understand, didn't feel for the work. You know, it's like a life situation, you know. You can't have everybody doing it the way you like. You know, there'll be people doing it the way you don't like, you know. But that's part of it all. You want to see your work badly reacted to by the mounting people, and you want to see it done very, very effectively in some places.
Okay, that's the first part. I will now open up we have time for questions, comments to Al, and hopefully not to me. Yes. Does anyone have the mics?
The end of the conversation, you were talking about from a weird position, the work, and you had this brilliant explanation about how you wanted people to really find their own solution, and it reminded me of how John Cage approached a lot of his work, which kind of reflect back on where you were coming to speak about where the position and relationship to Western art. And I was wondering about your relationship with John Cage.
Well, I have a bit of challenge hearing people from the distance.
Yeah, he's asking if and what is might be your relationship with the composer John Cage, if at all. That he was saying that the freedom that you expect of the viewer. That is something that reminds him of the work of John Cage, and he's wondering if there's any connection or relationship with John Cage.
I don't know if I know about John Cage.
That answers it. Yes, here. Ben.
Could you say something about the process in the studio of making these big metal pieces, where the material is coming from the source, and how it's put together in unit by unit, and then larger pieces attached to larger pieces, and the freedom that you give your studio assistants to make some decisions, but not all decisions?
Okay, yeah, I heard that.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, the process of from the bottle cap to the work, well, I should think that I have about two major stages. The first stage is where I maybe figure out the format or the pattern that is to be made, and then I introduce it to the assistants and see that they are able to get on with it. And then they produce what I call blocks. Blocks can be as small as
So blocks of patterns,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And each would produce a certain number of those blocks. It's like building, you build the blocks and then later on you now come and put them on each other. And so the next stage would be the composition, where I take the blocks and, then arrange them. Mostly I work on the floor, because they're not together yet, so they can only be positioned together next to each other on the floor. And when I look at them and I'm satisfied that it's saying something, then I ask that it's put together. And the process is so free and so free and slow. It's pretty slow and painstaking that most of the times I don't produce drawings for. The pace is so slow that it's like me doing a slow drawing, and if the dimension is large and I needed to do some more configuring, I at times do what I call my drawing. I use ropes. There are several colors of ropes that I have in the studio, and I can put them at one place and walk them this way, to delineate areas that probably I have to take a different color, or, so that kind of. So those are the two stages that they go through, and it's easy working that way because you can easily, lasso out, cut out a portion which you think is not right, and change it for something else. So the freedom is there to do so many things.
But also the assistants sometimes invent new patterns of weaving, right?
No, they don't invent it. I invent.
Okay. Okay, I won't push that. But in terms of the naming, because these patterns have names, in terms of the naming of the patterns, how does that work?
Oh yeah, they work with a pattern. I've taught them a pattern. They work with it sometimes. They take a look at it and give it a name. And over time, they've given names to almost all the formats or patterns that we've worked with in the studio, and they have some interesting titles, names like.
That's G8.
G8.
Yeah,
G8, I remember we were working on that kind of pattern at the time that they had a G8 meeting in Genoa. and there was some demonstration or something, so it was in the news for some time, And then they came up with the name G8 for a certain pattern, And they have so many of them, the flower, singlet, and designer one, all kinds of names, which works very well for me, because if I want them to do a certain pattern, I just mention it. I want singlet, this color, and then they understand it. It's a kind of code which works for all of us.
Okay, there was a hand at the back there. Oh, okay. Okay, good. Please.
How did you get the idea of using the bottle caps in the first place?
And the idea of using the bottle caps, the way I use them, or what?
How did you, come to use them as material, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because as an artist, I want to explore as many things as possible which have possibilities, of being used. My understanding of sculpture is, three-dimensional form, so anything that can help me create a form. And I've learned in course of time that each material has its own language, and they could come with symbolism as well. I think over time, I have learned to work only with material that have seen human use, material that have been exposed to human touch and such things, because such material, to me, come with, they normally are called discarded, and that is what excites me. I want to show that they are not discarded things, but they are things which can have a lot of meaning, and therefore I proceed to give them a new lease of life, by using them, not recycling, but using them, giving them a new purpose, Yeah, so the bottle caps came in, I discovered them by accident in the bush and kept them for some time. And then over time, I started researching and thinking about how this media could, and then I discovered that they were very, very instrumental in the history of the world, in fact. In the history of the world, drink were very instrumental, because during the times of early trading and, voyages and all these things, drinks were some of the items that traders carried along. Certainly in Africa, they carried drinks and some other items as things that they brought for trade with the people. And eventually, drink became something like a currency. Drink and some other item became like a currency, which was used in purchasing almost everything, from
slaves to
items
cash crops.
to maybe humans, slaves were paid for with drink, and they were probably brought to the Americas, and they produce more drink by working on sugar plantations and such things, and the drinks found their way back into Europe and back to Africa as currency again, and more, so that they served as a link between the three continents. They are a very strong link between the three continents. And so when I'm working with, I work with the bottle caps, I have a feeling that I'm touching something that was at the beginning of the contact between these three continents.
Yes, and then.
Yes, you spoke a lot about the metamorphosis in your work, and the way your work changes through process of sort of accumulation and decay. And I was curious about that sort of end of the series, the decay of the series. And I was curious if that was something that was difficult for you to get used to initially, or if you had to learn to accept sort of letting go of something that you had created and sort of accept the end of the series.
No, it wasn't difficult for me to work with the idea of decay because having seen samples of it in my culture, whereby the pot breaks and it is put to so many other uses, you know, it was something that I was even looking for. And most of the times too, I want to work with the idea of dilapidation, of decay, you know, in fact, you know, as a process, you know. That's why I've always had problems with museums in some cases where they would want things to remain the same way throughout history, whereas as human beings or as living things or even non-living things, we all have to be changed by time. Time is a very powerful sculptor. Time sculpts and sculpts very powerfully. And I want to be able to make use of the facility of time, you know, to also create my work. So it wasn't a problem for me to worry about. I didn't worry about the decay. Yeah, I rather embraced it and want to use it as my process.
Yeah, yes.
You've been commissioned to make works in so many different parts of the world. I'm thinking about the High Line or in Venice or in Paris. And I wondered, do you think of your work as transforming those spaces, those sites, or do you conceive of the work in response to those sites? Which leads?
Well, I think I make effort to let the work have some relationship to the site. Yeah, it's a difficult thing, but that's what I think most artists would want to do, that the work is not an imposition on the site, but something that goes with the site. It's saying something about a site or, you know, let me see if I can remember. Yeah, when I did something for the Paris Triennale in about 3 or 4 years ago, I did a site visit and was told to work on the facade of a building. And I was told that the building was for fashion. It's a fashion museum. Yeah. And the building was at a place that you had view of the what's the name of the
Eiffel Tower.
Of the Eiffel Tower. And so the idea of the Eiffel Tower, fashion, you know, were all things that I had to think about in my conceiving the piece for this thing. And what it did result in, I had to use things like mirror. Mirror is a very good fashion accessory. You need it. We were talking about fashion. And also the Eiffel Tower is, I think, the fashion signature of Paris. Yeah. And so the mirror was in the work, and it was to bring in the Eiffel Tower. And meanwhile, the mirror is also talking about fashion. So that way I tried to marry the function of the space with what I was doing.
Yeah, and then.
Thank you so much for your wisdom and sharing all your thoughts with us. I was wondering more about your approach to collaboration with artists, both within your discipline and outside of your discipline, and also if you could share with us some of those more memorable collaborations as well. Thank you.
Collaboration.
Yeah, have you had any collaboration with other artists to begin with, and then next, what was the experience?
I don't think that I've done any collaboration as such. Maybe it's one of the things I should try to do now.
Except if you think of collaboration in the sense of his relationship with the curators and the collectors who are asked to, basically remake the work, right? As creative collaborators, not just collaboration in terms of artists working with artists. Because I think that that's one of the things that you've invoked in the past, that everyone, has a creative impulse, right? Which is what you are asking the curators to bring out, that creative impulse, right? To bear on the work.
Yeah,
so I think that that's a sense of a collaborative spirit, if you will, that goes beyond the question of two artists sitting together to think about one work, to generate one particular work. Yeah, please.
So your installation at Sonsbay, was that a collaboration between the people who brought their pieces in, and then when they draped over the
hedge, yeah. So the Sonsbeck, she's asking if that was a collaboration with the people who paraded the work.
No, it wasn't a collaboration. They only carried the work around in the parade. Yeah, they weren't there at the installation site. Yeah, they gave the work some visibility during the parade, and it was good in the sense that people could see what eventually came onto the hedges, as the work. They see that is something that, like the title that I gave it, drying towels. Something that you could fold and take along. So their contribution was important in that sense. But during the putting it on drying it on this thing was strictly between me and the operators of the equipment which lifted it up.
I'm curious about another dimension of the issues of trade and currency and human contact. As you now have used presumably millions of these bottle caps, has it become, have supply and demand become easier or more difficult in your process?
So she's asking about the bottle caps, the fact that you've worked literally with millions of these bottle caps, and she's wondering about the supply and demand aspect of your resourcing.
Well, the supply is always there. At times I sit down and wonder the quantity of drink that is consumed in a little village, It's a university town like here, and
I'm sure you would do fine if you were living and working in Princeton.
So at times I get worried at the quantity of drink that, well, there is a stopover place nearby,
Yeah, it's a transit junction.
Where most long distance vehicles will stop. And I think at night they would do a lot of drinking, and that might be the reason why there would always be supply.
All the material that you use in the metal pieces is post-consumer, it's after it's been used?
Yeah, all of them are, post-consumption. Yeah, there's nothing new over there. All of them have to be consumed stuff. What happens is that there are people who go around, collect bottles for the distillers. And these distillers have to remove everything from those bottles, including the tops and the labels and everything, and rebrand them when they put their own drinks in. And so they always will have supply of other people's caps. Yeah.
Yes, the corner there.
I was wondering, for instance, at the Met, where your work is installed and it's alive, but it's surrounded by so many other African works that are in vitrines and almost in state. I'm wondering if you feel a dialogue between these different works and these different eras of work, or life and death, or is there something there, or
Well, I don't know. I should feel that there's a dialogue between them, because the object that is always referred to as or associated with my works is also there. You know, so there certainly has to be some.
I think one should mention that that he has two works, right, at the Met. The first one was installed in the African Gallery, and this was the one with which they made this connection with kente cloth. After Venice, he became a contemporary artist, which is when they acquired the big, massive, piece that was installed alone, like contemporary art is installed, one wall, right? So he, I think, changed from being an African artist to a contemporary artist, and so that's the narrative, if you will, as far as the Met's configuration of the work. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, but that's the way that the two works were inscribed into the collection. Yeah. Yes.
It's been fascinating to hear you talk about the transmigration of the bottle cap. I was curious also about your own life and the early influences. I don't know, but it sounds like going to Cummington in rural New England might have had some, been an interesting impact environmentally even to you. So I'm just curious what that experience was like in Cummington. I know about the chainsaw, but what else did you take from Massachusetts?
What did you take out of the Cummington experience? Is a rural, a place. Was your consciousness or sensitivity to the environment heightened by that?
It was extremely heightened. It was extremely. That's why I could. Before I went there, I had worked with a chainsaw. I used it in logging wood. In my school, we would go on a wood hunt, once in a year, and we'll go with chainsaws and use it just to log the woods and load onto the truck in order to bring to the school to work with, and at any of those times, at none of those times did the idea of the chainsaw as a tool to use occur to me. But this place, my studio was away in the bush, in the bushes, with no other this thing, and so extremely quiet, place. So that was what I think made me sensitive to, the quality of the material of the tool.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Elle, for being here with us, and thanks to the audience.